Throughout my semi-long film career, I have had both the pleasure and the blessing to use what I would like to call the big boy toys. I grew up in that video world where the best thing you can get your hands on at that age and at that budget was like some kind of Canon Rebel series, a 5D if you were feeling frisky. And you had new cameras coming out like the GH4, which I started my career on and then moved into a GH5, did a ton of work on that, even shot a feature film on a freaking GH5. And then got to witness this new push into the cinema camera world that was brought to the prosumer and consumer market. I got to build a career on a Blackmagic pocket cinema camera. I got to be the owner of a Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro, which I used for years on short films, documentary, commercial work, branded content, all the jazz. I've been able to shoot my bigger short films on Red cameras. I got to shoot my most recent science fiction film on ARRI, and now with the other production company I work with, I am constantly using a Venice on feature work, short films, and big documentary pieces. Suffice it to say, I haven't wanted for much when it comes to technology. But then there's the other side of my work, and that is being a public affairs soldier for the US Army, specifically the West Virginia National Guard. And for all intents and purposes, I'm their video guy. In fact, for that first big stint where I was in the Army, I was using my GH4 and my GH5. I was using my pocket cameras all throughout COVID and multiple trainings. I even took my Ursa Mini Pro on a friggin' deployment. But then there came a point where I need to stop using my own personal gear for the Army, which then I finally got my hands on a kit that the Army issued me. Now, what do you think that camera is? Of course, if you saw the thumbnail and read the title, you could probably guess. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Canon C100, which, in my opinion, when it comes to the consumer level market for cinema cameras, this is one of the godfathers, one of the OGs. Now, with that said, I could still happily use my FX3 on Army gigs. I could use my cameras. It's not like it's not allowed. In fact, I think my videos have been really great using my own gear. So after all this time, why today, while having all the experience and more importantly the access to this high-tech gizmo gadgets of filmmaking, do I still opt to use this C100 that came out in 2012 over those fancy beasts? Let's talk about that. So first things first, I guess kind of like the mini specs run through. And again, I'm not the biggest specs guy in the world, but here are the big ticket items. One, it's a Super 35 sensor, which at the time was big. Full frame wasn't as dominant as it was back then, so having a Super 35 camera was a big deal, as everything else was pretty much APS-C or even Micro Four Thirds. And also, it's got a bunch of your tactile doodads that's built out like modern day cinema cameras or say like broadcast cameras, where a lot of the functionality that a cam operator would want or an AC would want is on the side here, is where you can dial in the look without having to mess with the flip out touchscreen, which by the way, it's got a flip out touchscreen. Oh, look at that, yeah. It really is built out like a video camera that was designed for people who have experience with say DSLRs and also broadcast cameras, but it gives more of a quality and it tries to lean more towards that cinematic look and feel, at least stylistically, or the approach that Canon wanted to take with this, especially for documentary. This thing was rocking and rolling for documentary when it came out. And of course, you got this top handle here, which has an extension cable that allows you to plug in some internal audio. You got audio controls over here, making, again, going back to that documentary mind space I think Canon was in when they made this. Now I'll get the obvious stuff out of the way of why this camera can be seen as a paperweight in some people's eyes. And honestly, the biggest thing's probably that codec. This thing shoots in AVC HD when you shoot at full 1080. I don't have the gear, nor do I have the patience to use external monitors to get the 4K out of the Mark II. But when you combine the codec and also the 8-bit color and also the dynamic range of the camera, that's essentially the fall throughs that people, use as a reason to never use this thing again. So I'll tell you what, you have to nail your exposure with the C100. I think the menu system is super outdated, and I think some of the design flaws are just really noticeable. It also doesn't help that my 24-105 lens that I'm using on it has pretty much not withstood the test of time. I mean, I have footage where you can see these funky flares happening inside the lens because the two pieces of glass are starting to separate a little bit. So you get this like double circle lens flare. It's kind of cool sometimes, but overall, it means this thing is falling apart. But allow me to quit talking and get back to the point. Like I said, I could take an FX3 out to these shoots and probably be very happy for it. Here's the thing. This thing, if you have any semblance of knowledge, skill, or even the slightest idea of what you're doing, this can be a beast. The durability of the C100 to this day still stands. I have taken this thing to massive combat exercises where I'm going through the mud in tanks with multiple units around. There's smoke and everywhere. I have taken this thing to the desert where I've thrown it around all over Qatar for a best warrior competition, running around in pools even, and just being in these really harsh temperatures, harsh sunlight, and unpredictable conditions where a rock could just fly into the camera. I've gone aerial with the bad boy. I've taken it in helicopters. I've taken it in the cold. I've taken it for BTS, and it truly has survived fully with no issues whatsoever through all of these scenarios, which is amazing to say for a camera that's over 10 years old. And you know what? The convenience level of this camera is more shocking than you think. I am constantly shooting documentary pieces with the Army. That's my main thing. If anything, it's broadcast journalism style pieces. And having something that has that soft cinematic quality coming from a Super 35 sensor that has a decent autofocus, that has ISO that I can trust damn near to 10,000, and also internal audio that I can control from a unit as long as it's going to a good shotgun or lavalier. That is huge as a documentary filmmaker, because that's what this camera is really good at. It's good at freaking docs. You know what else this camera has that a lot of modern cameras don't have today, and it absolutely blows my mind that this technology hasn't been improved upon? That's right, baby. Those sweet, sweet ND filters. Sure, they're hard stop NDs, but it's internal NDs. Way better than not having them. And I get it. I know the FX3 would probably have to be a bigger camera to get NDs into it, but you're really telling me we haven't found the technology to put slimmer NDs into cameras yet? And although I shit talk the exposure and kind of the fidelity and the integrity of the image before, if you do nail the exposure and you know what you're doing, you get some really good images out this thing. But still, with all that said, there's many more conveniences that an FX3 or an FX6 or a Pocket Cam or a new Z Cam or the new Lumix SL Mega 5000s they have, or whatever the hell, those cameras would probably make my life a little better, at least from an image quality standpoint. So, to get to the point, why is this camera the one I still choose to take on these shoots? Well, it reinforces three important lessons that I think every filmmaker, be it solo, documentary, indie, or big budget commercial feature filmmakers, need to understand. One is that functionality that I'm always talking about on this channel. I am no longer in the field of caring so much about whether or not my camera can do 4K, whether or not it can do crazy ISOs or crazy image specs, color gamuts, whatever. What's become far more important, especially as someone doing doc, solo work, run and gun, is what can I physically do with this camera in my hand? And although the image is not the most spectacular thing on a spec sheet, I can run around with the C100 all day and shoot my little buns off. I don't have to worry about batteries as much as I can pretty much survive an entire day of shooting on this battery. I don't have to worry about sound that much because the scratch audio from the top handle is actually very usable, and with an XLR and a shotgun, I now have a full audio setup for my interviews and my running guns and for my quote-unquote scenes. So functionally speaking, without having to add much to the camera, basically in this form factor right here and adding a shotgun mic, I have all I need to do an entire week of freaking shooting, no matter the environment, no matter the mission. The second thing is honing your skills. Not only is this a camera that I think is really easy to use, I think it's a camera that reminds you of the things that are important when you're looking for a good image. And I try to be as humble as possible, but I will very confidently say that I can shoot better on this C100 than a lot of people that I've seen just go out and buy a freaking Red or the newest Sony camera and then just start shooting willy-nilly. Using something like the C100 on a regular basis has been this wonderful reminder of how much skill trumps equipment. It allows the cinematographer, the camera operator, and the filmmaker to truly shine. But it also could teach you points of where, hey, I can start to see more easily where images can break. And once you start to hone your skills on things that have lesser dynamic ranges and color bit rates that are just to the floor, then when you get your hands on something that does have a high dynamic range, that has better color, that has more flexibility in the sensor and the resolutions, you start to see the difference. You start to see how you've trained your eye on older equipment so that you are more suited and more prepared to easily use better equipment. And the third thing is the idea of accessibility. Because here's the thing, I'm at a point in my career now where I do have opinions on gear. In fact, I've actually gone out of my way to say I do think gear matters, but it doesn't matter when it comes to your ability as the filmmaker. That's the plateau of where I think gear matters, because at a certain point, a camera's a camera. It is a tool. It is a piece of alloys and metals and buttons and electronics that allow us to chase a certain medium of storytelling. My short film Trial 54 was on an Arri Alexa, but if that thing were to kick the bucket for some reason and I had to transition to my Ursa Mini Pro to shoot that film, good with me. Nor if I don't think if I shot that thing on an FX6 or a Venice or an Arri or whatever other camera, it would not diminish the abilities of the filmmaker. It just would change around certain flexibilities with the crew and certain functionalities that my cam op and my DP would have. And you can get this experience of understanding your gear and understanding your cameras and getting into the world of cinematography very, very easily now, because this bad boy right here is pretty damn cheap on Facebook Marketplace, on Craigslist, if anybody still uses Craigslist, on eBay, wherever. Yeah, $400. And if you're somebody that wants to get into cinematography, that wants to get more into this professional feel of filmic style storytelling, this is not only a fantastic camera to start off with, but a fantastic camera to grow up with. You can make professional stuff with this camera, even to this day. I don't care what anyone says, you can, 100%. And to be able to break into that skill set in that world for $400 is really, really nice. Could probably get it for less too if you got the Mark I. So overall, I've been very appreciative that this is a camera that was offered to me. This is a camera that I still continue to use. And even though my commercial work, I'll still use my FX3 that I'm using right now for YouTube. I'll still shoot most of my bigger projects probably on a Sony Venice, my docs on an FX6. I'll probably dance around between Red and Arri for narrative projects. And I'm sure I will use a multitude of other cameras and lens combos throughout my days as a filmmaker. But when Uncle Sam is calling, and even for some other documentary work where I just need to get up and go and not worry about the camera and just make a good story, then I will remember the respect I have towards the OG. And let us not forget the respect that we as filmmakers who grew up on YouTube, who grew up on the 5D wave, or wherever you come from, let us not forget the respect we owe Canon for making one of the first cameras that made professional cinematography and camera operation available to the public and for the people. Now, if only they could do that nowadays. This has been Davis with the Six Shop, and for God's sakes, get out there and shoot something in practice, damn it. And I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.